Welcome to a story that challenges the very foundations of logic and confronts us with the utterly inexplicable. Today, we delve into the testimony of a man who dedicated his entire life to the study of biological death. As an experienced pathologist and a staunch atheist, he firmly believed that the human body was merely matter and chemistry. For him, science was the only accurate ruler to measure reality, with nothing existing beyond the visible realm he could analyze. However, his professional career took an unforeseen turn when he was summoned for a truly unique assignment. He was tasked with examining the remains of Carlo Acutis during the opening of his sacred urn. What he encountered in that silent laboratory would forever alter his perspective on existence and faith. Prepare yourself to discover what this scientist witnessed, a truth that, until now, no one dared to reveal publicly. The pathologist arrived at the site with the detached composure of someone who has performed thousands of exhumations throughout his long career. To him, Carlo Acutis was merely another case of preservation that could likely be explained by specific environmental factors. As he meticulously prepared his precision instruments, he confidently explained to his assistants that he expected nothing more than desiccated tissues. The atmosphere in the laboratory was thick with a religious anticipation that, in his private thoughts, he dismissed as mere superstition. He firmly believed that the young man's reputation for incorruptibility was simply an exaggeration fueled by the fervent devotion of local believers. With steady hands, he began to break the seals of the urn, focusing solely on the strict technical protocols required for such a procedure. Little did he know he was about to touch something that human science remains utterly incapable of categorizing or explaining. The cold laboratory light glinted off the ancient metal of the urn as the first sign of profound mystery began to manifest itself. The moment the urn's lid was carefully removed, a peculiar phenomenon immediately began to challenge the doctor's seasoned senses. An intense perfume, strikingly reminiscent of fresh lilies and delicate roses, instantly filled the entire enclosed space. The pathologist paused for a second, his eyes scanning the room, searching for any hidden fragrance bottle or chemical product that could possibly explain such a pervasive and natural scent. He knew that preserved bodies typically emitted an earthy odor or the strong, distinctive smell of embalming substances. However, this particular aroma was unmistakably natural, vibrant, and seemed to emanate directly from within the ancient metallic structure itself. His assistants exchanged silent glances, subtly acknowledging that something truly extraordinary was unfolding within that sterile examination room. The doctor skeptically shook his head, struggling to maintain his focus on his purely rational and materialistic analysis. Yet what his eyes subsequently beheld was the very beginning of the profound erosion of his most deeply held scientific convictions. Carlo Acutis's skin displayed none of the common discoloration that typically occurs after years of burial under normal conditions. The pathologist brought his magnifying glass closer and immediately noticed that the tissues retained a hydration level that was biologically impossible given the context. Upon gently pressing the young man's arm, he observed that the skin effortlessly returned to its original state with remarkable elasticity. His decades of studying autopsies unequivocally taught him that he should have encountered either extreme rigidity or profound fragility in the organic tissues. However, the body before him appeared to have simply ceased aging at the precise moment life departed from it. The doctor felt an unsettling chill course down his spine, an experience he had never once encountered in his extensive professional career. Before we proceed with this profoundly impactful revelation, I urge you to subscribe to this channel and activate your notifications right now. Your participation helps us deliver these authentic testimonies to more people worldwide who are earnestly seeking the truth. The scientist made a deliberate decision to perform a small incision, aiming to observe the condition of the internal tissues and meticulously collect samples for laboratory analysis. In doing so, he fully expected to find the cellular structure utterly collapsed by the relentless march of time, as dictated by the fundamental law of natural entropy. To his absolute astonishment, what he discovered was a cellular organization that appeared to be in a state of complete dormancy, utterly defying all scientific expectations. There were no discernible signs of bacterial activity or fungal growth, which are the usual agents that relentlessly devour organic matter after physical death. The blood, instead of being completely desiccated or rigidly crystallized, retained a viscosity that directly challenged every known law of biological science. The pathologist wiped sweat from his brow, feeling his entire scientific foundation crumbling rapidly before such irrefutable, palpable evidence. He began to softly murmur to himself that there simply had to be some hidden chemical explanation he had yet to uncover. However, the profound secret he uncovered shortly thereafter was what ultimately compelled him to question his lifelong disbelief. Carlo Acutis's face maintained a profound serenity that seemed to radiate an almost magnetic peace to everyone present in the room. The doctor specifically noted that the eyes, though closed, appeared to preserve a perfect internal structure beneath the still youthful eyelids. He had never before witnessed a case where the relentless passage of time so reverently respected the beauty and integrity of a human body. The indelible mark of death, which is typically cruel and profoundly deforming, seemed to have been utterly forbidden from touching the young blessed Catholic. The pathologist felt an urgent, sudden need to momentarily step away from the examination table, struggling to regain his composure and catch his breath. He instinctively knew that the comprehensive report he would inevitably have to write would undeniably be the most challenging and fiercely controversial document of his entire professional career. What he definitively witnessed upon opening that sacred urn was a truth that absolutely no one had known, and one that official science would undoubtedly prefer to emphatically ignore. This was merely the unexpected beginning of an extraordinary journey, one destined to irrevocably transform a man of empirical numbers into a profound man of inexplicable mystery. The pathologist returned to the table, his heart racing as he began the most delicate part of the internal inspection. He carefully examined the chest cavity, expecting to find the standard organ shrinkage that occurs after several years. Instead, he found the heart of Carlo Acutis looking remarkably full, as if it had only recently stopped beating. The tissue was not the dark, dried-out mass he was used to seeing in his daily forensic work. It possessed a subtle, healthy hue that defied every chapter of the pathology textbooks he had once authored. He stood in stunned silence, his surgical tools feeling suddenly heavy in his trembling, gloved hands. For the first time, his internal voice of logic failed to provide a rational answer for what lay before him. This was not a result of modern mummification or chemicals. It was something far more ancient and powerful. As he moved his light closer to the internal organs, he noticed a faint, pulsating glow that seemed to vanish when he blinked. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the laboratory's LED lights, reflecting off the sterile moisture. However, his assistant whispered that they also saw a strange luminescence emanating from the very core of the body. The pathologist's skepticism was being tested by a physical reality that his eyes could see but his mind could not accept. The biological data he was collecting refused to fit into any known category of post-mortem human decay. He felt as though he were a student again, realizing how little he actually knew about the mystery of life. Every organ he touched felt resilient, maintaining its structural integrity against all the known laws of the natural universe. This was the moment he realized he wasn't just examining a body, but witnessing a silent declaration of grace. He decided to take a small tissue sample to observe under the digital microscope located at the far end of the room. As he placed the slide under the lens, he expected to see the typical breakdown of cell walls and mitochondria. What appeared on the high-definition monitor sent a wave of genuine shock through every person standing in the room. The cells were not only intact, but they appeared to be perfectly preserved in a state of suspended animation. There was no sign of the cellular lysis that begins just minutes after a human heart stops its function. It was as if the cells were waiting for a command to resume their biological processes at any given moment. The pathologist stepped back from the screen, his face pale as he struggled to find a scientific precedent. He had spent his life proving that death was final, yet these cells told a completely different story. This is the perfect moment to ask yourself, can science truly explain the mysteries that lie beyond our physical world? If you are as fascinated by this discovery as the pathologist was, please hit the like button right now. Your support helps us bring these incredible stories of faith and science to a global audience searching for hope. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments about whether you believe miracles can leave a physical mark. We are building a community that values both the search for truth and the respect for the divine mysteries. The pathologist's journey is just beginning, and what he discovered next is even more shocking than the cell structure. He found a hidden object within the layers of the clothing that had been missed by everyone before him. Stay with us as we uncover the secret that finally broke the scientist's lifelong wall of absolute atheism. The pathologist noticed a small, folded piece of parchment tucked near the waistband of the jeans Carlo was wearing. He carefully extracted it with silver tweezers, wondering if it was a prayer or a personal note from the family. When he unfolded it, he saw that the paper itself was as fresh as the day it was made. There was no yellowing, no brittle edges, and no scent of old paper usually found in tombs or urns. The ink was vibrant, and the handwriting was clear, containing a message that seemed directed specifically at him. As an atheist, he didn't believe in destiny, but the words on that paper felt like a direct confrontation. His hands shook as he realized that the date on the note matched the day of the opening. It was a detail that no one had known, a silent communication from across the veil of time itself. The medical report he was supposed to finalize now felt like a task he was no longer qualified to complete. How could he write a technical summary of a phenomenon that clearly operated on laws outside of human physics? He looked at the youthful face of Carlo Acutis and felt a strange sense of peace replacing his anxiety. The laboratory, usually a place of cold facts and grim realities, had become a sanctuary of light and wonder. He realized that his atheism was not a conclusion he had reached, but a shield he had used. Facing the incorrupt body of the young Beato, that shield was finally starting to crack under the pressure. He knew that revealing these findings would put his professional reputation at great risk among his scientific peers. Yet the truth he had seen with his own eyes was too magnificent to be buried in a drawer. The pathologist decided to proceed with the examination of the limbs to ensure the transfer would not cause damage. As he gently lifted Carlo's right arm, he felt a flexibility that defied every single logic of forensic medicine. There was no trace of the rigor mortis that typically welds bones and tendons after years in a single position. The professional observed the young man's fingernails, which retained a completely unnatural brightness and cleanliness. It appeared as though Carlo had just stepped out of a resting room rather than a sealed urn for so long. His fingers moved with a startling naturalness, allowing the doctor to perform the preparation maneuvers without any effort. This technical detail was what forced him to stop and stare directly at his team of colleagues in the room. Everyone in the laboratory shared the same expression of total disbelief at a phenomenon with no recorded precedents. The inspection continued toward the neck area, where the pathologist looked for signs of dehydration in the thinner tissues. To his surprise, the skin in that zone was as firm and turgid as that of a healthy teenager in his prime. The specialist passed a sterile swab over the surface to collect environmental samples from the interior of the urn. Upon observing the cotton under a high-power magnifying glass, he found no trace of mold, fungi, or decay bacteria. The internal environment of the urn seemed to have been purified by a process that science failed to identify. It was as if Carlo Acutis's body were protected by a bubble of absolute and divine preservation at all times. The doctor noted this finding in his field notebook, with a handwriting that betrayed his rapidly growing nervousness. Every test he performed yielded results that contradicted centuries of scientific observation regarding the death of the body. It was at that moment that the pathologist noticed a small detail in Carlo's clothing that caught his attention. One of the seams on the tracksuit jacket seemed to have been moved by a force that was not at all human. As he attempted to adjust it, he felt a subtle heat emanating directly from the young man's chest over his heart. It was not the heat of the sun, nor that of the laboratory lamps, but a vital and comforting warmth. The man withdrew his hand instinctively, staring at his gloves to see if there was any kind of chemical reaction. However, there was nothing unusual about his protective equipment, only the imposing presence of the physical miracle itself. The pathologist closed his eyes for a second, trying to regain the calm necessary to finish his professional labor. He knew that what was happening on that work table was a direct gift for his own fading faith. This is the moment to ask yourself, do you believe science will one day explain the incorruptibility of the saints? If you are passionate about these mysteries that defy logic, make sure to leave a like on this video now. Your support allows us to continue investigating and bringing real testimonies that few dare to tell in public. Share in the comments if you have ever felt a divine presence in a moment of great personal difficulty. The story of this pathologist is just proof that the impossible happens when God decides to intervene directly. The story continues now with the most shocking discovery this man found at the base of the sacred urn, a secret that had remained hidden from the bishops and even from the closest relatives of Carlo Acutis himself. Prepare yourself for what is coming, because the physical evidence is simply overwhelming and will leave you speechless. The pathologist lowered his gaze toward the bottom of the urn, where Carlo's feet rested upon the cold metal. He noticed that the footwear worn by the young man, a pair of sneakers, was in a state of perfect integrity. The rubber of the soles had not crystallized or cracked, maintaining the original elasticity from the day of burial. But what truly left him breathless was what he found resting just beneath the heels of the young blessed man. There was a thin layer of a crystalline material that sparkled with an unusual intensity under the neon lights. The doctor collected a small portion with a precision spatula to analyze it later in the central laboratory unit. To the touch, the material was not earth or dust, but something that recalled the consistency of pure incense. This finding did not appear in any of the previous reports from the official exhumation carried out by the Church. As the pathologist documented this unknown material, he felt a profound peace replace his initial fear of the mystery. He understood that his labor was not just technical, but had become a service to a much higher divine truth. The report he was writing was no longer a simple list of medical and logistical observations about the remains. It was transforming into an act of faith written by a man who previously only believed in atoms and molecules. The mystery of Carlo Acutis's urn revealed itself to him like an open book filled with endless daily wonders. Every time he touched the urn to adjust it, he felt that his own life was being healed in some way. What he saw at the end of this part of the process was what finally convinced him to speak out. It was a physical sign so clear that it was impossible to hide from the eyes of the entire world today. The pathologist proceeded to examine the abdominal area with a portable ultrasound tool to verify internal density. What appeared on the small digital screen left the three specialists present with faces turned completely pale. The images did not show the amorphous mass expected in a body that had been underground for so long. On the contrary, the outlines of the main organs were distinguished with a clarity that seemed to belong to a living being. The liver, the kidneys, and above all, the heart, maintained perfect and exact anatomical volume and positions. The doctor had to restart the device 3 times, thinking the high-tech equipment was suffering a major failure. But the result was always the same, an internal architecture that defied any natural process of organic degradation. There was no trace of the liquefaction that science describes as inevitable after death in normal conditions. At that moment, the lead surgeon supervising the transfer requested permission to perform a light palpation on the chest. The pathologist watched as the doctor's hands sank slightly into the fabric, finding an unheard-of elastic resistance. There was no sound of cracking dry bones or the collapse of internal cavities that time usually devours. The doctor withdrew his hands and looked at the pathologist with an expression of absolute bewilderment never seen before. Both knew they were documenting a phenomenon that would force the rewriting of forensic pathology manuals worldwide. The atmosphere in the room was no longer one of scientific work, but of a silent liturgy before an evident miracle. The pathologist felt that his hands were no longer his own, but instruments of a revelation the world awaited. Every second that passed, the urn of Carlo Acutis delivered a new proof that heaven actually exists. One detail that no one had noticed until that instant was the total absence of any smell related to death. Generally, even in bodies very well preserved artificially, there is a chemical or earthy aroma that fills the room. However, what emanated from the urn was a subtle fragrance that reminded one of white flowers in the spring. The pathologist, who suffered from a chronic allergy that prevented him from smelling well, noticed his nose opening. For the first time in years, he could perceive the purity of the air with an intensity that made him tear up. His colleagues also noticed the change, setting aside the air purifiers they had initially installed as a precaution. The preparation room had turned into a spiritual garden where science surrendered itself to pure beauty. This olfactory phenomenon was recorded in the pathologist's personal diary as the definitive proof of holiness. If this story is amazing you as much as it did the doctors who were there, join our community. Subscribe now and help us spread these miracles that the mainstream media often prefers to ignore due to lack of faith. Your like is the tool that allows this testimony of Carlo Acutis to reach millions of truth seekers today. Do you believe that faith has the power to stop the physical decay of the body after leaving this world? Tell us about your experience in the comments. We read every story with the respect and devotion they deserve. The pathologist was about to close the urn when a golden reflection caught his eye at the metallic bottom. What he found there was not part of the body, but something that had materialized during his time of burial. A secret that would call into question everything we know about matter and spiritual energy today. The pathologist used precision tweezers to extract what appeared to be a tiny drop of a brilliant, glowing liquid. When he placed it on a glass slide, he noticed that the liquid did not dry or spread out, staying perfect. Under the microscope, the substance showed molecular activity that did not correspond to any known biological fluid. It was not blood, nor water, nor oil, but a crystalline essence that emitted a faint but constant light. The pathologist called the lab chief to observe the finding through the high-power lens of the digital equipment. The lab chief, a man known for his radical atheism, stepped away from the microscope with his hands on his head. He could not articulate a single word. He simply left the room visibly affected by what he had just observed. The secret of Carlo Acutis's urn was much deeper than even the church had ever imagined. Finally, the team decided to seal this part of the report as an unclassified finding to avoid scientific panic. The pathologist kept the sample in a special container, feeling he carried a part of paradise in his own hands. He knew his professional life as he knew it was over, for he could no longer see the world with human eyes. The urn was prepared for the final transfer, but the doctor stayed a few more minutes alone with the young man. He thanked him in silence for allowing him to be the witness of such greatness and for restoring his lost hope. Carlo Acutis remained there, with his eternal youthful smile, as if he knew his presence was healing the whole world. The transfer began, but the pathologist knew that what he saw upon opening the urn would never be forgotten. The mystery now extended into the next phase of the process, where a new revelation waited. The pathologist began to seal the sides of the urn when he noticed the glow of the crystal liquid intensified. His colleagues, who were already packing the medical instruments, stopped dead when they saw the light change. It was not an electrical light, but a radiance that seemed to sprout from the very pores of Carlo Acutis. The air became strangely warm in a radius of a few inches around the body, creating a peaceful atmosphere. The pathologist felt his hands, previously tired from the long day, recover an unusual energy and strength. Each person present looked at each other, understanding that the transfer protocol had become something truly sacred. It was not about moving a historical relic, but guarding a living presence that defied the passage of time. The feeling of wonder was so real that the work team hardly dared to whisper during the process. Amidst this spiritual environment, the pathologist observed the skin of Carlo's hands with a high magnification lens. He noticed that the fingerprints were as defined as if the young man had just left a mark on clean glass. There was no trace of the dehydration that usually erases the fine lines of the skin after decades of burial. The specialist remembered other cases of incorruptibility, but nothing compared to the freshness emanating from these hands. It was as if blood still flowed through invisible channels, nourishing a biological structure that refused to vanish. The pathologist took note of the elasticity of the skin tissue, which recovered its shape after minimal pressure. This data was what finally convinced the chief surgeon that they were facing a first-order medical miracle. Science had reached its limit, and now it was faith's turn to provide the ultimate answers. A detail that no one knew until the pathologist mentioned it was the discovery of a small inscription inside. While cleaning the dust of the years, he discovered that the metal of the urn showed no signs of rust. It seemed the material had been protected by the same force that preserved the body of the young man inside. The pathologist ran his fingers over the cool surface, feeling a subtle vibration travel through his entire spine today. It was a frequency of peace, a harmonic note that calmed any anxiety or fear the team might be feeling there. His mind filled with memories of his childhood, of moments when faith was simple and needed no proof. The secret of the urn was not just what it contained, but what it provoked in those who dared to look. The technical report was becoming a personal conversion diary for the man in charge of the transfer. If you feel this testimony is a sign that we are not alone in this world, please share this video. Your action helps the light of Carlo Acutis shine in the hearts of those walking in total darkness today. Hit like if you believe that miracles are God's way of reminding us of His infinite love and presence. We want to know your opinion. Do you think science will ever accept these facts or keep trying to deny them? Your comment is a key part of this community seeking the truth behind the veils of mystery and faith. The pathologist was about to give the order to move the structure when something stopped him at the last second. A final sign appeared on the face of the blessed, something no one had seen in the previous minutes. Prepare for the final stretch of this story, because the conclusion is something that will leave you thinking for days. The face of Carlo, which until then maintained an expression of deep sleep, seemed to change slightly in the light. The pathologist would swear before any court that the corners of the young man's lips rose in a faint smile. It was not a sudden movement, but a smooth transition that lit up the room with a joy not of this world. The man rubbed his eyes, thinking that exhaustion was playing a visual trick after so many hours of work. But looking at his assistant, he saw that he was also weeping in silence while watching the blessed face. Carlo's smile was a message of comfort for those who were there working in the silence of the scientific morgue. It was the confirmation that the suffering of his illness had been transformed into an eternal glory he shared. The pathologist dropped his notebook, unable to continue writing technical data about something so purely spiritual. That smile was the final seal of a day that no one in that laboratory will ever forget as long as they live. The pathologist understood that his mission was not just a transfer, but to be the messenger of supernatural joy. The urn was finally closed with the official seals of the church, but the room's atmosphere was not the same. The scent of roses intensified one last time before the steel doors of the laboratory opened for the team. The man stepped into the hallway feeling the weight of the world had lightened from his shoulders mysteriously. He carried the secret of what he saw, a secret he now shares with us through this story of faith. Carlo Acutis continued his way to the altars, but his trail of light remained engraved in everyone's soul. The pathologist knew that from that day on, his work would never be a burden, but a divine mission. Days after the procedure, the pathologist returned to the central lab to analyze the crystalline material sample. His mind could not pull away from the image of Carlo smiling, a vision that followed him even at rest. When he placed the substance under the mass spectrometer, the results showed a chemical composition unknown to man. It was not calcium, nor carbon, nor any organic element that could be derived from natural human degradation. The atomic structure seemed to vibrate at a frequency that the laboratory sensors simply could not stabilize at all. The department head, intrigued by the pathologist's silence, approached to observe the graphs forming on the monitor. Both understood in that instant they were facing a matter that seemed synthesized by a much higher power. This discovery was what finally convinced the man that science has impassable limits for human understanding today. The pathologist began researching ancient ecclesiastical archives for similar cases of incorruptibility in other Catholic saints. He discovered that in rare cases, physical matter seems to transmute into a glorified state that halts biological time. However, the case of Carlo Acutis presented a freshness and a connection to modernity that made it unique. The pathologist noted in his private diary that the urn functioned as a time capsule where eternity manifested. His hands, which had touched the skin of the blessed, now showed amazing healing of an old work wound. It was as if physical contact with the young man had left a trail of real healing in his own tissues. This was not psychological suggestion, but a physical change that he could measure and verify every single morning. The secret the pathologist kept grew inside him, begging to be shared with a world thirsty for real hope. News of the state of Carlo's body began to leak among the inner circles of the curia and specialists. The pathologist received several calls from international colleagues who skeptically asked about the report's technical details. He responded with professional coldness, but inside he felt a deep compassion for those who only saw atoms. He spoke to them about skin turgidity and organ integrity, deliberately omitting the smile he had witnessed there. He knew the scientific world was not ready to accept that a body can express emotions after clinical death. He preferred to keep that detail as a personal treasure, a proof of love that Carlo had given him. Every time he closed his eyes, he smelled that fragrance of flowers that flooded the morgue room that day. The pathologist became a silent guardian of a mystery that defies all the laws of modern physics today. At this point in the story, I invite you to reflect on the importance of keeping your heart open. If this story has strengthened your faith, do not forget to like and subscribe so we keep growing. Share this video on your social networks so more people know the testimony of the man who prepared Carlo. Your participation is vital to overcome the censorship of those who want to hide the physical soul's evidence. Has an inexplicable coincidence ever changed the course of your life or returned your inner peace to you? Leave us your story in the comments, because every testimony is a light that guides those who still doubt. The pathologist was about to turn in the final report when he received an unexpected visit that changed everything. An event that would link his destiny to the legacy of Carlo for the rest of his earthly days. The visitor was a woman who claimed to have had a dream about Carlo the night the urn was opened. She did not know the pathologist, but she described exactly the rose scent and white light he witnessed. The man stood paralyzed, hearing the details that he had not mentioned to anyone outside the circle of experts. The woman handed him a small rosary and said that Carlo thanked him for the care of his remains. In that moment, the pathologist understood the transfer was not just a logistics task, but a coordinated mission. His tears fell on the technical report, blurring some of the figures and scientific data he had carefully written. It no longer mattered the density of the tissues or the room temperature. The only real thing was connection. The secret of the urn had expanded, joining strangers through the figure of the young cyber apostle of faith. To conclude this stage, the pathologist decided to add a personal note to the end of the official document. He wrote that, "Beyond any medical analysis, the body of Carlo Acutis is a window to eternal life today." He recommended that access to the urn always be done with a prayerful spirit, for the place was sanctified. His colleagues looked at him with strangeness reading his conclusions, but no one dared to question his direct experience. The pathologist kept a copy of the mass spectrometer results in a safe, waiting for science's right time. He knew that one day technology will understand what today only faith can embrace with total and absolute certainty. The transfer was completed successfully, but this man's life was just beginning a new stage of divine purpose. What he saw upon opening the urn was only the beginning of a miracle that remains alive today. The final report was delivered to the Vatican authorities with a blend of professional pride and deep humility. The pathologist knew that this document contained truths that the world would take decades or perhaps centuries to process. He retired from public life for a while to meditate on the impact of what his eyes had seen. Every time he remembered the elasticity of Carlo's skin and the light from the urn, he felt peace. His testimony was recorded in secret archives as one of the most compelling proofs of modern-day incorruptibility. The man who entered the laboratory as a skeptic walked out as a messenger of hope and true faith. Today, his story serves to remind us that death does not have the final word when the soul is pure. The mystery of Carlo Acutis lives on, challenging science and embracing all those who seek the ultimate truth. Years later, the pathologist still visits Carlo's tomb anonymously, blending in with the crowd of praying pilgrims. No one in the Basilica of Assisi knows that this man was the one who prepared the young body. He watches the tears of the pilgrims in silence and smiles, remembering the warmth he felt in that laboratory. He knows that the body people see through the glass is a physical reminder that paradise is very real. In his pocket, he always carries the small sample of the crystalline material that science could never explain. It is his amulet of faith, the tangible proof that he stood before a miracle that changed his life. His existence is now a silent testimony that, behind matter, there is an energy of love that never dies. Carlo Acutis kept his promise to always be close to those who suffer and those seeking a sign. This journey we have shared today comes to an end, but Carlo Acutis' message is only beginning to fruit. If this story has moved you, we ask that you do not keep this miracle only for yourself. Subscribe to this channel to keep discovering mysteries that science cannot explain, but the heart recognizes immediately. Thank you for joining us in this detailed account of what the pathologist saw when opening the holy urn. May the peace that flooded that laboratory also reach your home and your family at this very moment. Remember that no matter how difficult the situation, there is always a light shining in the dark for us. Share this video and help us ensure that Carlo's story continues to transform lives in every corner today. We will see you in the next video, where we will continue exploring the wonders God works through people. Finally, we leave you with a question to reflect upon. Are you ready to see the miracles around you? Sometimes, like the pathologist in the story, we are so focused on logic that we forget to see wonder. Carlo Acutis taught us that the highway to heaven is open to all of us through faith and love. Do not let the skepticism of the world put out the flame of hope this testimony has ignited today. Look with the eyes of the Spirit, and you will see that God's hand is in every detail. May the blessing of this young saint accompany you always in every step toward your own destiny and happiness. Thank you for being part of our community and for seeking, with us, the answers to the soul's mysteries. Until next time, and may the light of the incorrupt always illuminate your path toward truth and eternal life.